I almost lost my baby boy when my mom carried him outside. My family and I faced tragedy when our young son suddenly disappeared from the house. My mom, who suffers from dementia, carried my son outside, leaving him alone in a dangerous situation, and disappeared herself. Our family went through fear, despair, and shock before the toddler was found thanks to a passing man. But every time I look at my mom, I remember the night we almost lost our baby boy. And I thank fate that we didn't. My name is Kat, and I live in the quiet town of Longwood. My life is peaceful and quiet, and I am truly grateful and happy. I have a loving husband, two wonderful children, a teenage daughter and a young son, and a job that brings me great satisfaction. It would seem that nothing portended trouble. However, 2 years ago, fate dealt me an unexpected blow. My father became seriously ill. He had always been a strong and hardy man, but this time the disease was stronger. My husband and I then lived in the city center, enjoying the comforts of city life, while my parents lived in the suburbs, in a cozy house with a garden. When Dad's condition worsened, we realized that we needed to be there to support Mom and help her caregiver. We made the decision to move in with my parents. The move requires some changes in our lives. My husband switched his job to telecommuting, which allowed him to be home most of the time. Our eldest daughter moved to a new school, and although she had a hard time adapting at first, she soon found new friends and got involved in school life. I left my little son, who was only 9 months old at the time, at home with my mom when I went to work. Everything went smoothly at first. My mom helped with the baby, cooked meals, cleaned the house. She was always full of energy and optimism despite her age. But as time passed, I began to notice a disturbing change in her behavior. 2 weeks later, my father left us. He fought to the end, but the disease was stronger. It took us a long time to recover from this loss. Gradually, however, we began to return to our normal lives, albeit with a heavy heart. My mother felt the loss of my father especially keenly. She often asked about him, tried to find him in the house, even though we explained to her that Dad was gone. It was unbearable to see her suffering, and I realized that now our main task was to surround her with maximum care and attention. At first, everything went as usual. Mom actively helped with the baby, cooked delicious dinners, kept the house in order. She was always very active and cheerful despite her age. But over time I began to notice little oddities in her behavior. She would forget to turn off the stove, leave the door open, or mix up our children's names. At first I thought it was just an age thing, but then I realized it was more serious than that. One morning I woke up before everyone else and decided to make breakfast for the family. When I went into the kitchen, I saw my mother sitting at the table reading the newspaper. At first glance there was nothing unusual, but something made me suspicious. As I got closer, I noticed that she was reading the newspaper upside down. I asked her about it, but she just smiled and said it was more comfortable that way. That was the first wake-up call. After that incident, I started paying more attention to her behavior. It turned out that she often forgot where she left things, confused the days of the week, and could even forget why she left the room. One day I found her standing in the middle of the yard with a watering can in her hands, even though it had recently rained. We went to the doctor and the diagnosis was disappointing: dementia. It was like an ice-cold shower. My mom, such a strong and independent woman, now needed constant help and care. We decided that we would care for her together, as she had done so much for us. My eldest daughter, seeing how hard it was for her mom, decided to become a doctor. She dreamed of learning how to treat diseases like dementia and Alzheimer's to help others avoid the suffering our family was going through. But one day something happened that made me reconsider all my plans. I went to work as usual, leaving my young son with his mom. When I returned home, I found that my boy was missing. Mom was sitting on the couch watching TV, not even realizing that something terrible had happened. Panic gripped me instantly. I rushed to look for my son all over the house, looking in every corner, opening and checking the rooms. But he was nowhere to be found. My heart was pounding so hard that it felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. I called my husband, screaming, crying. I had the most horrible thoughts going through my head. What if he fell? What if someone kidnapped him? Or maybe he was just lost in one of the rooms. Every moment seemed like an eternity. I ran around the house like a madwoman, calling his name, but there was no answer. Only silence and fear filled the space around me. Suddenly I heard a faint sound from the next room. There was an old closet that had not been used for a long time. Opening it, I saw my little son sleeping peacefully inside, wrapped in a blanket. Apparently, his mom had decided he would be safer there and had put him there, completely forgetting about it. I got scared to imagine what might have happened if I had come back later or hadn't noticed his absence at all. It was a moment when reality hit me with a new force. My mom's illness had progressed faster than I had anticipated and was now a real threat to my child's safety. After this incident, we made the decision that we could no longer leave Mom alone with the kids. We hired a caregiver to help her during the day, and at night she slept in a separate room. It wasn't an easy decision, but I realized that my children's health and safety was the most important thing. One evening after returning from work, my husband and I gathered as a family for dinner. My mom looked cheerful, and after the meal we talked for a while, sharing the events of the previous day. Then we headed off to rest. I put the kids down, checked on Mom, and went to bed. All was quiet that night. The house fell asleep when the clock struck midnight. I lay in bed, trying to sleep, but the thought of how quickly my mother's condition was deteriorating kept me awake. Each day brought new things to worry about: forgotten keys, late medications, strange conversations. I knew I had to be prepared for everything, but I still hoped that the worst was over. Even so, the anxiety wouldn't let me go. The night dragged on slowly, and eventually fatigue took over. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep sleep, but in the early morning I was awakened by a phone call. It was a policeman calling, wondering if my child was home. Not fully awake yet, I answered that the child was at home, sleeping in his crib. However, when I went into my son's room, I found the crib empty. We carefully examined the whole house, checked every corner, but the baby was nowhere to be found. Where is he? Where could our little son have gone? My husband stood in our bedroom doorway, his face white as chalk. "Cat, your mom is nowhere to be found either," he shouted, grabbing his head. "I've checked every room, she's gone." A wave of despair washed over me, tears welling up, fear paralyzing me. I couldn't understand what could have happened to our child, and the worst scenarios flashed through my mind. While we were waiting for the police, I remembered about the surveillance camera installed near the front door. Turning on the tape, we saw the mom leaving the house with the baby in her arms. She walked uncertainly, as if she didn't know where she was going. The camera captured her crossing the yard and heading for the wicket. We stared at the screen in a daze, unable to believe our eyes. What was she doing? Why did she take the baby and leave? The footage showed the mom opening the wicket and walking away with the baby toward the street. The next footage was even more disturbing. She was walking along the road, holding the baby in her arms, and stopping periodically to look around. We saw her suddenly turn off the sidewalk and head toward the woods nearby. We were shocked by what we saw. Could a mom really have gone that far with a child? What was she planning to do? These questions were tearing me up inside. Soon the police, rescue workers, and ambulance arrived. Running out into the yard, I saw one of the doctors holding my son in his arms and, sobbing with relief and worry for my child, I rushed toward them. I hoped they had brought my son and my mom, but there was no mom. So, I showed them the camera footage, told them about her medical condition, described her appearance, and the police began their search. They organized patrols in the neighborhood with additional forces. After a couple hours of anxious waiting, we were told that Mom had been found. One of the police patrols found her a few kilometers from home. She was wandering around confused, couldn't remember anything, couldn't give her name or address. She was brought back home and emergency doctors immediately gave her first aid. Seeing my mom in that condition was incredibly hard. She looked lost and helpless. Her eyes were wandering and her speech was incoherent. The doctors said that stress and physical exertion could have aggravated her condition and recommended that she be hospitalized immediately for a full examination. The policeman said that our baby was found by a man who was passing by, noticed him on the side of the road and called for help. When I saw my little son, I could hardly contain my sobs. He was all dirty and scared but unharmed. The doctors examined him and said he was fine. But this incident was the final blow to us. My heart clenched at the thought of what might have happened had it not been for the intervention of this kind stranger. Imagining the possible consequences, I couldn't help but feel emotional. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but at the same time I was incredibly relieved. My son was with me, alive and well, and that was the most important thing. The next day we discussed the situation as a family. It was clear that Mom could no longer be left unattended. It was dangerous not only for her, but also for others. This incident signaled to us that the situation required immediate intervention. We realized that Mom's condition required professional medical attention and round-the-clock care. It was a difficult decision, but we realized that there was no other option. Several months passed. Mom lived in a specialized center and we visited her regularly. Each visit was a challenge for us because she was becoming less and less recognizable. Sometimes she remembered our faces, sometimes not. But we tried to support her, to tell her about our news, to share our joy and positivity. We brought her photos, books she loved, and tried to create an atmosphere of comfort and care. But more often than not, she just looked at us with empty eyes, not understanding who we were and why we were here. It was especially hard at times like these. We felt like we were losing touch with the person we had known and loved all our lives. But despite this, we kept coming, holding on to the remnants of our memories and hoping for the best. Time passed and our lives gradually returned to normal. Our oldest daughter successfully graduated from high school and went to college. Our son is growing up healthy and happy, and my husband and I continue to work and take care of our family. But every time I look at my mom, I remember the night we almost lost our baby, and I thank fate that everything turned out okay.